we can go right ahead and dive into the second segment where I talk about the Eastern Conference. Actually, before I do that, I do want to acknowledge the chat just for a second. Corrido, once again, hey, what's up, Corrido? In the chat, he's asking my opinions on Steph Curry's ankle injuries and saying that Curry should go to surgery or force him to wear high tops. And it's the same ankle that he rolled on the Bulls game. So Curry has always had ankle injuries. That's been the one thing that's plagued his career. It's every so now and then he'll just go down with an ankle injury and it'll sideline him for a few games. So I don't really think there's much that can be done to change it. Even if he does wear high tops, I really don't think that's going to affect much because he also wears ankle braces to make sure that his ankle doesn't do that. Yet, he always succumbs to those injuries. So I really don't think that it's going to necessarily plague him. He's one of those players where it's when you have a great player like him and he is an all-time great, it's most of the time they're usually able to turn it on and off, and even despite their injuries, there's numerous players who have played through injuries and have still played rather well. Then again, there's also a few players who haven't played well through injuries. But the fact that it's mainly his ankle, and that's not going to affect his shooting, in my opinion, because of how the offense is set up. The offense is set up so that way there are numerous screens he can run around, and he'll be able to get his shot off just about any day of the week. So I don't really think that's going to affect him much in this play-in tournament. However, anything can happen. But regardless, let's go right ahead into the Eastern Conference and talk about the seedings, which are finally determined, because, they flip-flop every now and then. So the number one seed is obviously the Boston Celtics. They've held the one seed throughout the entirety of the regular season, and they have the most wins in the Eastern Conference. So makes sense how they hold that one seed, and they have it locked down. The Knicks actually surprised me with being able to take the second seed. Now, this is the first time that the Knicks have been able to get that high in the seedings since 2013 and 2014 with Carmelo Anthony. So, very, very surprising season coming in from the Knicks. I've said previously that if there was any team that could beat Boston, it will be the Knicks. And so far, being the second team in the Eastern Conference, I've been proved they do have the best odds. But regardless, the third seed is the Milwaukee Bucks. They ended up dropping a couple of games, which ended up moving them down from the second seed all the way down to the third seed. And the Cavs are the fourth seed. The Orlando Magic are the fifth seed. Excuse me. And the Pacers were able to secure their playoff spot as the sixth seed. So the play-in tournament is going to be consistent of the 76ers and the Miami Heat competing to play against the New York Knicks. And then the next round of the play-in is the Chicago Bulls going up against Atlanta, seeing who could compete for the 8th seed and who would win in that matchup right there. So, obviously, the winner of the 9th and the 10th is going to have to play the loser of between the 7th and the 8th. But I really think we can sort of disqualify the 9th and 10th seed because, quite frankly, with the Sixers and the Miami Heat being in the play-in, I really don't think that the Bulls or the Atlanta Hawks have anything to be able to stop either of those teams. The gap between the 9th seed and the 8th seed is 5 games. So with that in mind, I just think that the 7th and 8th seed are just by far that much better than the 9 and 10 seed. So I'm not really going to talk much about that play-in tournament, like that matchup specifically, because I just don't see that. I just don't see either of those teams making the playoffs. It's going to be between the Sixers and the Miami Heat. Now, depending on who wins the first game is really like that's the real anticipation, because whoever wins the first matchup goes up against the Knicks. And I feel like the Sixers or the Miami Heat, they have a really good chance of beating the Knicks, even though, like, you know, as a relative close to New York, I don't see either of those teams beating the Knicks, but it could happen. The Miami Heat, they're notorious for making ridiculous playoff runs regardless of what seed they are. So anything can happen in these playoffs, and I really wouldn't put it past either of these teams to be able to beat the Knicks. Now, if one of those teams loses, so if Miami ends up losing, then they might have to play against the Boston Celtics in the first round, which will be a repeat of the Eastern Conference Finals matchup where Miami almost blew a 3-0 lead, but they ended up beating the Boston Celtics while the Celtics were at home in a blowout win. So there might be a lot of revenge fueled into that matchup in the first round, which will allow the Celtics to be able to win. And I really don't think that Miami has a chance of making it deep unless they win the first round of the play-in. Unless they win the first play-in game. I don't think they're going to have what it takes to beat Boston this year. And as for the Sixers never are able to beat Boston. So I don't see that changing whatsoever, even though they just got Embiid back and, like, you know, their team is much, much better with Joel Embiid. I genuinely do not see that happening. So I think the Sixers' playoff hopes, they're basically it. Like, they have to win the play-in, and then they're just going to lose in the first round. That's my prediction for the Sixers, simply because it's just like they do this every single time, and it's most likely not going to change. So the most anticipated matchup of the Eastern Conference is going to be the Bucks going up against the Pacers. So this has potential to be very, very exciting, because if you guys remember, earlier in the regular season, Giannis and a couple of Indiana staff members, they got into a little bit of debate and a little bit of a heated exchange because Giannis wanted the game ball, but they weren't giving Giannis the game ball. And all the drama just started flooding in, yada, yada, yada. And obviously there's a lot of bad blood between these two teams. And it's going to be very, very close. Like, I think this series is going to go to 7 games, and it's going to come down to the very final seconds on who is winning this series. Because, quite frankly, the Milwaukee Bucks, they have not been nearly the dominant team that I thought they were going to be since getting Doc Rivers. And the Pacers, they are 4-1 in the regular season when going up against the Milwaukee Bucks. So they have a lot of experience beating the Bucks in this matchup, as opposed to Bucks, who are kind of struggling right now. So I could definitely see the Pacers beating the Bucks in this series, which is why I think this series is going to go to 7 games, because I could also see the Milwaukee Bucks just turning it on, figuring it out with Dame and Giannis, and being able to, because in the playoffs, the offense starts shifting to a half-court set. So the pacing is going to be a little bit slower, and I'm not entirely sure if the Pacers' high-powered offense is going to be just as high-powered as it was in the regular season, where teams were very lazy getting back on defense, and which allowed the Pacers to get open threes. In a playoff matchup, it's very, very different. So depending on how Doc Rivers coaches, and depending on how good or bad the offense is for the Pacers, it could make or break either of their seasons, and I have this going to 7 games. So I have no idea which of the teams are going to end up coming out on top, just because of like how all of the things that I just brought up. Now, the Cavs, they match up against the Orlando Magic. So this is arguably the best matchup that the Cavs could really ask for when talking about like playoffs and the matchups, because I said previously like they did not want to match up against the Knicks. That would be really, really bad considering how they lost to the Knicks in the first round the previous year, and the Knicks only got better since then. So this matchup against a really inexperienced Orlando Magic team is probably the best move for them. So I see the Cavs winning in 5 games. Usually Orlando, like, they steal like one game, like no matter what opponent they go up against. So I have the Cavs winning in 5. I don't really see the Orlando Magic making it out, even though it is a possibility. But Donovan Mitchell in the playoffs is just another animal. So I really don't see them losing that series. So it's really going to come down to the Bucks and the Pacers, because that, I think, is just by far the best matchup in the entirety of the Eastern Conference. Now, Miami against the Knicks, that would be a very good matchup. I think that since, Miami was able to beat the New York Knicks last year because, some of the players were injured and it was just Jalen Brunson doing the most he could going up against the Miami Heat, I think there's also going to be some revenge fueled into the Knicks and trying to win in that series. I feel like they're going to take that series much more personally than they would any other series. And so I have that series, if that does end up happening, going to 6 games or even 7 games in favor of the Knicks. So that's another matchup that I'm really looking forward to in these playoffs. I genuinely do not expect the Atlanta Hawks to make any kind of noise, and I don't expect the Chicago Bulls to make any kind of noise either. But that's just me. So, and again, whichever of those teams ends up making it out and goes up against the Boston Celtics, I think the Celtics are just going to make it out anyway. So those are my thoughts on the playoffs and the overall playoff picture. So with that, we are out of time for this second segment and part 2 of the playoff review, I guess you could say. That rhymed, Dr. Seuss. But regardless, we're going to go into the third segment where I give a quick recap of all of the NBA games that went down last night, and as well as a recap of the season as a whole. Maybe talk about like some of who I think is going to win some really important awards, things of that nature. So I will be right back after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.